It's a lie. I'm just kidding. But yeah, how is everybody doing this morning? Good? Okay, awesome. Well, we'll be starting momentarily. Folks will be trickling in, as we know. So if everyone can, again, please silence your phone or put it to vibrate. We would appreciate that a lot. And again, we had a bit of a redirection, I'll say, in terms of our agenda. So there will be a panel first regarding the China's overall malign influence. And for you media folks, please get this clear. Just factually, the panel will be focusing on the China's malign influence, and then we'll be also talking about a case of Mongolia as well. But that portion, the Committee on Present Danger China only. And then the president, again, he's coming as a capacity of the president of the World Mongol Federation. It's an organization that allows all Mongols from around the world to unite and to fight for their rights, wherever they may be, whether in Afghanistan, China, Russia, whatever. So that is the case. So please just make that distinction that we're not, the president's speech doesn't necessarily are under the flag of the CPDC. He strictly wants to represent the interests of the overall Mongolian people and the humanity. So, but we're still very, very honored to have him here, and we also believe that it's timely that we talk about the malign influence of the CCP as free Americans, to remain as free Americans as long as possible. So, okay, we'll be starting in a few minutes. Again, if you have family members or friends coming in, please let them know to make less noise as possible, okay? Awesome. Awesome, all right. And as Sister Kathleen told me in 4th grade, please, if you're going to move, please move as quietly as possible. I know the bathroom is right in the corner, okay?
Probably want to use the one on the first floor.
Yeah.
Just because it'll pick up sound.
Okay. Use the one downstairs on the first floor, and please keep it clean, everybody, okay? Okay, awesome.
You want to see it? Is it chairs or these? Okay. Then you can sit there after, or would you prefer to sit here?
I'm going to stand over here. Let's just
When
sit
you-
over. There's an empty chair. There's no chair.
Hello, Freddie. How are you?
How do you do? Gaffney. Frank Gaffney.
Yeah. You have a card?
Do.
I think I've been wanting to talk with you. Christian journalist at the White House.
Yeah. Looks like you've got that to do.
They'll email you some behind the scenes at the White House.
Good dress. Yeah, we're going to stand over there. It's Someone's going to start things. I just want to make sure we're ready to go.
Jailbreak.
Everybody, please welcome Mr. Thayer. All right, everybody, thank you so much for coming today. We are very honored to have everyone here. On behalf of the Committee on Present Danger China and the Captive Nations Coalition, we welcome each and every one of you to our timely event. We wish and hope that our panel discussions will be fruitful and will be helpful to all those seeking knowledge about China's malign influence. Again, that is strictly under the umbrella of the Captive Nations Coalition and the Committee on Present Danger China, and we're also honored to have technically after the event, after the panel, to have our Honorable Elbegdorj to talk on behalf of the World Mongol Federation, of which one of our panelists, Mr. Enkabad Tokchog, is part of, and he'll be talking about the overall interest and the aspirations of the Mongolian people. Okay. So today I am honored to be participating in this panel with our great Vice Chairman of CPDC, Frank Gaffney, also the former Undersecretary of the Department of Defense, also fought for our freedom during the 80s against the mighty Soviet Union, no longer mighty now. We're also very honored to have Mr. Bradley Thayer. He is the Director of the China Policy section in the Center for Security Policy. And we hope that you'll enjoy our discussion, our fruitful discussion today. So without further ado, please welcome Mr. Frank Gaffney.
Thank you very much. This is a somewhat extraordinary program for us. We're delighted. Maggie, thank you very much for opening up this wonderful facility. And thanks to all of you for being here. We're going to combine a program live in this room with a webinar, which we do each week, describing the concerns that our Committee on the Present Danger China has about the Chinese Communist Party, its ambitions, and the degree to which they are aggressively pursuing, both through unrestricted warfare against our country, a plan to enslave the rest of the planet. Notably, not exclusively, but notably through a vehicle that Xi Jinping calls the Belt and Road Initiative. We're going to visit about how that program is helping to bring about what I believe is at least the option for a global war waged by the Chinese Communist Party against the rest of us. They make no secret, of course, of their ambition to dominate the rest of the world. But the Belt and Road Initiative is a means through its colonial infrastructure build-out of putting themselves in strategic nations and positions literally all over the planet, from which they can, among other things, project power if they choose to do so. And that could become very problematic in time of war. I personally believe we are in the midst of a global war, the unrestricted form of which is, of course, something that we talk about a lot, in particular in these programs. I think we've done something like 67 of them, these webinars, helping to address and expose the kinds of unrestricted warfare that the Chinese wage against us. But it also has the potential to go kinetic, much as we see in Ukraine at the moment with the junior member of the so-called No Limits partnership with Communist China. So you put all this into the mix and you have a very dangerous environment indeed. And we're going to try to spend an hour or so today exploring what this actually means for the United States, yes, but for the world as well, free and increasingly unfree, because that's the object of the exercise. We're going to talk, among other things, about a very important part of the formerly free world, now very much part of the unfree world. In fact, we call it a captive nation of China, Southern Mongolia. And we have in Ingabot, one of our colleagues in the Captive Nations Coalition led by Se Hoon, we'll hear from him, and we hope to hear a bit more from our distinguished guest, the former president of Mongolia as well. To begin, though, we're going to hear from a familiar face in this program series, a member of our Committee on the Present Danger of China, I believe one of the foremost academic and analytic figures in our country, for sure, arguably worldwide, when it comes to the Chinese Communist Party, its past, its current activities and plans, and what we must expect it has in store for all of us if it can get away with it. His name is Dr. Bradley Thayer. He has a very distinguished pedigree of study, including a doctorate, as well as teaching in some of the foremost academic institutions in this country and the United Kingdom. He is the author of a number of really important books, including co-authoring most recently with Lian Chao Han, a terrific primer on the problem we're facing today, entitled Understanding the China Threat. You can also find his writings in a number of other outlets, including Epoch Times, The Hill, and other outlets. We're delighted to have him with us. Brad Thayer, as always, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Frank, very much indeed for that warm introduction. And ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure to join you today. And I'm very grateful, of course, to our host, as well as to the audience, both in person, of course, and joining us through other media. What I'd like to do is discuss very briefly the causes, really, of China's aggression and the consequences for states and international politics. And using the Belt and Road Initiative, of course, is really a test case or a case study of how that is advanced. China, of course, has become a hyper-aggressive state in international politics. It is so largely for three reasons, one of which is because of the ideology of the Chinese Communist Party. It is a Leninist Maoist party which is compelled to aggress against its own people, against its neighbors, and against other states in international politics. That aggression is made worse by its current leadership under Xi Jinping. Xi Jinping is the world's most dangerous man, as he's often been called, and I would certainly concur with that assessment of Xi, in the sense that he's risk-accepting and he seeks to bring about an accelerated and very dramatic change in international politics in the near term, that is today and tomorrow, not by 2049, the centenary of the Chinese Communists' ascent to power, but immediately. And then thirdly, of course, the tremendous growth of China's power. China, of course, has become a formidable economic, military, diplomatic, technological, ideological competitor for the United States. And the principal cause of that is the United States itself. The fact that the United States let China into its economic ecosystem in the 1990s, which accelerated under the World Trade Organization, has made possible not the Chinese Communist Party's claim that they've lifted people out of poverty, but it was essentially the Western economic system, that is largely the U.S., which has allowed China to rise, to have the power that it possesses today. And I'm sad to say, as Frank Gaffney has time and again, with colleagues like Roger Robinson, noted that we still allow China to raise money on New York markets, for example. U.S. government still invests through the Thrift Savings Plan in Chinese entities. So we're still funding our adversary, which is an egregious situation that needs to be reversed. As an aspect of China's power, they have initiated the Belt and Road Initiative, right? That is now well over a decade old, and it takes many different forms. There's a digital form, but there's a traditional trade aspect of it, which is to do what China touts itself as being supremely expert at doing, providing investment and infrastructure for countries worldwide. So the Chinese, when they advanced the Belt and Road Initiative, touted that they were very easy to deal with, unlike the Europeans or unlike the Americans, who would have long lists of rules, whereas the Chinese would show up, they'll build the port, they'll build the railroad, they'll build the airport, etc. They'll facilitate trade. And states have come to learn, to their great chagrin, that that was a tremendous mistake, because the Belt and Road Initiative serves nefarious purposes. The first of which is to achieve China's strategic ambitions, the party's strategic ambition of dominance in global politics. And the Belt and Road Initiative is a way of advancing ideological dominance as well as economic dominance worldwide. Secondly, economically, trade with China comes at tremendous cost, because the Chinese, despite what they say about the Americans or the Europeans, in fact do have essentially their tendrils hooked around enterprises worldwide, and they seek to control them and dominate them. Even Pakistan has come to learn that engagement with China comes at a tremendous cost for the Pakistani people. And it is one throughout Latin America that we see, in Africa, for example, Southeast Asia, worldwide, we see the same types of behavior. And then, of course, the Belt and Road Initiative is also a way of advancing their ideological goals, the image that China is working to create a common destiny of mankind that will result in prosperity for everyone, when in fact that is simply a stalking horse for their domination. So the Belt and Road Initiative is a nefarious enterprise, quite unlike the Marshall Plan that the United States advanced in 1947 and afterwards. The Belt and Road Initiative is a mechanism for Chinese control which helps to establish their dominance. So states around the world have felt this, but of course countries like Mongolia, countries Tibet, we can see around the world, especially the countries on the periphery of China, sadly Hong Kong and Macau, the same type of problems arise where the Chinese bring these entities under their control and emphasize ideology and absolute control over these political entities, rather than allowing them to profit, to trade as equals, and to have an alliance relationship as equals, as the United States does. We've witnessed in Hong Kong where China has torn up the 1984 agreement with Britain and has, in a fundamental sense, killed the goose that's laying the golden egg. They would prefer to kill Hong Kong's wealth generation in order to have Hong Kong under its control, and Macau. So we can see other countries. We see this in East Turkestan. We see this in Tibet. Mongolia is falling under this pressure as well. So sadly, it's a common theme and a lamentable one as well. As a last point, I would just simply like to note that despite its great power and despite its great energy at advancing its interests in international politics, the party is supremely vulnerable because it knows it is not legitimate. It knows that it's rejected by the Chinese people. It knows that it's rejected by the states with whom it interacts, even Pakistan, countries, and again, Africa, Latin America, who encounter China, come away with a very essentially rueful consideration of engagement with China in the first place. China facilitated the COVID pandemic. The CCP facilitated the COVID pandemic, lied to the World Health Organization and the rest of the world as well about its consequences. So we can see that the CCP is a malevolent force in international politics, and it is one that, if it is not checked, if it's not addressed, will seek to establish its dominance and to assure that countries not only on its periphery but globally fall under its control. And that would be, of course, a great tragedy for the people of China, who have to suffer under its tyranny, for states on its periphery like Mongolia and so many others, as well as other countries in international politics, and the liberal international order, of course, that the United States created, and which has been the greatest force for freedom and for prosperity in international politics. Thank you very much indeed for your attention this afternoon.
Thank you, as always, Brad, for a terrific overview of the problem that we're confronting and the true nature of the adversary that is bringing, not, again, just this particular country, but every other, great, great peril. We're going to talk next with a man who has emerged as an extraordinarily impressive, relatively young, but quite dynamic figure in the fight for freedom against the Chinese Communist Party. His name is Se Hoon Kim. I'm very proud that he has become the director of this informal coalition of expatriates, in many cases from nations that are now captives of the Chinese Communist Party, as well as, of course, representing the country that we love here, the United States of America. Under his leadership, the Captive Nations Coalition, which is well represented in this room, I'm pleased to say, has been a very active champion for freedom for both the countries that are currently enslaved by the CCP and at the forefront of the effort to warn about the enslavement that is now afoot through this Belt and Road process. To talk about the work of the coalition and also the task at hand, I'm delighted to welcome Se Hoon Kim.
Well, thank you, Frank, for that kind introduction. As Frank mentioned, it has been my honor since the summer of 2020 to lead this coalition of folks who have been victimized, more or less, by the Chinese Communist Party. I don't know if I can add any more to what our great Brad Thayer said, but let me give a bit of an example, a few examples of what it means to become captive in this current century. Captivity, unlike the conventional definition of captivity today, is vastly different. In the past, it dealt with another country invading another country and forcing upon its fascist will, as we have seen in multiple cases within World War II, just in World War II itself. That was the conventional captive nations that we saw. And we saw the emergence of the greater Soviet Union, which has kept many people in the dark, and unfortunately many people, including there was a huge death of the Jewish population as well that we don't know under the Soviet Union. Many aspects of that darkness occurred. But fast forward to today, when we thought in the early 90s, after this fall of the Soviet Union, the world would become more or less a lot freer than before. Unfortunately, that is not the case. It is not the case because we see a constant struggle for freedom going. I would even argue that freedom has not been completely installed in the world since the fall of the Soviet Union. We have entered and are still fighting a phase of fighting and rebuilding a society of which we want to call free. Take, for example, my native country, South Korea. When you see the Korean Peninsula, a once united people have been separated largely due to the communist influence coming from the south, and the Western the forces were also trying to make their way up so that it will ensure the freedom that the South Korean people have today. And thankfully, too, because of the sacrifices and the bravery of hundreds and millions of brave American servicemen over the years, we were able to become free. See, that is a type of struggle that we see today. But even after that freedom, using South Korea as an example again, we see South Korea still dealing with another entity that we are sort of forced to call a friend, which is the People's Republic of China. I'd like to get into that a little bit right now, as I believe that the case of South Korea could be the case of the world today, and is the case of the world today. South Korea and also Japan have been struggling in order to protect their sovereignty for a couple of decades now. We have threats not only coming from North Korea, but from constant influence of China under the name of economic cooperation and prosperity. But yet, very interestingly so, if you look at the public opinion about China in the last 10 years or so within South Korea, it has resulted into two things. Number one, it is no longer our friend. Children as young as 6-year-olds are saying that we believe that Chinese are coming over and to steal our culture, and if we let this happen, we will have nothing left for ourselves. And thankfully so, South Korean entities have taken action where they have largely and thankfully have moved a large portion of their industries from China and relocating to countries like India and Kazakhstan, and we hope in the future more in Mongolia and in other places like Indonesia as well. But why are they making that choice? Well, it's very simple. The surrounding Asian nations have realized that the CCP has a mindset that's not foreign to them nor to their ancestors, which is this. It's an imperialist mindset that wants to become the center of the world, not just of Asia, of the world. You know, we see the Chinese Communist Party constantly talking about how they were the center of the civilization all in at least Asia. But when you combine that type of mindset with a very tyrannical communist mindset, it comes out to every person on this earth needs to focus back on Beijing, and we need to become the main line of influence. And if anyone were to follow any worldview, it needs to be ours. So the people of South Korea have realized it. The people of Japan certainly have realized it. The people of Taiwan, very brave people, have also realized it. And I believe a lot of brave people within Ukraine and Russia have also realized the threats that are coming. As you know, a lot of we've seen hundreds of people, if not thousands of people, becoming victims to Putin's aggression in Ukraine. But a lot of people also forget that Putin did not invade Ukraine until pretty much the finale of the Beijing Olympics in the early 2022. Now we see dictatorships working together, and so if we were not to take any action in terms of containing this evil, whether it's coming from Putin's Russia or Xi's China or anywhere else in the world, it will spread. It will spread like a virus. And with the Belt and Road Initiative, when you see the quote unquote economic benefits of it, factually, how much economic benefits have we seen around the world? Let's take Pakistan, for example. A country full of some of the most amazing people that I've known personally in my life. They're becoming victims to their own government's tyrannical policies. For example, in the southern port of Balochistan, which is called the Guadalajara port, it's no longer a Pakistani territory. It has actually been converted into a PLA naval base. Now imagine that becoming a reality all over the world. First, it was Pakistan, and the innocent people of Pakistan are suffering. And you see the case of Myanmar. The juntas are working closely with the Chinese Communist Party. And you see the case of the Rohingyas, for example. A lot of people don't realize the Rakhine State was the first investment target of CCP-owned companies. Essentially what they said was, well, to the Burmese government was, well, in China, if we want to build an industry, and there happens to be people living in that certain place where we want to build a certain industry, we can just make it happen. We asked, how do you make it happen? Well, it's simple. You just kick them all out. You just raise all of their living grounds into the ground and make sure that industry is built no matter what. And we can do that in other parts of the world with this deal that we have for you. And who became the collateral damage? It was innocent people in the Rakhine State, as we know as the Rohingyas. Now, there are also many factors in there that also contributed to this that we could spend all day arguing about. But it is very clear. In the case of Burma, the free people of Burma became the collateral damage of the decisions made by the few. That is the effect that we see of the Chinese Communist Party happening around the world. Now, I would like to leave off a question with you. And before that, just a short summary. of everything that is going on. When countries around the world, especially free peoples around the world, let's just forget about governmental bodies and politicians who are making the decisions. If they're telling all of us, especially us in the United States and other parts of the free world or the Western world, that pay attention to what they're doing, because we're becoming victims of the decisions of a few. What will our response be as responsible Americans? And more importantly, are we willing to identify a problem and say that it's a problem and do something about it? The people of South Korea are warning us. The people of Japan are warning us. The people of Taiwan are warning us. The people of Vietnam are warning us. And the victims of all of these dictatorships around the world are warning us. One last thing. Nations, many nations around Africa are also beginning to realize the dangers behind their country's linkage with China. And so, when innocent African communities are saying to us, well, they are destroying our environment, they are taking away our sovereignty, our ports are becoming their military ports now. What will our response be in the world? I'm not suggesting any violence or wars or anything like that. But I think the best way to combat this is to spread awareness and to understand that it is indeed a threat that we must identify as a threat. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Se Hoon. And let me just say that under Se Hoon's leadership, one of the products of the Captive Nations Coalition, which I'm very proud, is a report that we published about a year and a half ago, I guess now, on the Belt and Road Initiative. We called it China's Dream, the World's Nightmare. And it drilled down on, I think, 25 or so of the roughly 147 nations around the world that are now in the process of becoming captive nations pursuant to this Belt and Road Initiative. I must tell you, I was stunned when I discovered how many are at one stage or another of negotiations or participation in this Belt and Road Initiative. And as Se Hoon pointed out, some are having deep regrets, but whether they can actually extricate themselves is another matter. But an insight into the kind of enslavement that is in fact part and parcel of this kind of arrangement from an expatriate of a country that has experienced this firsthand now for several generations. I'm very pleased to welcome Engebot Togachog, as I mentioned earlier, a member of our Captive Nations Coalition, and a member also of a very important organization, the World Mongol Federation, to talk a bit about what has been happening in Southern Mongolia now, which along with Tibet and East Turkestan and Hong Kong, the territory of Hong Kong, are all part of the original captive nations of Communist China. Engebot, welcome.
Good afternoon. My name is Engebot Togachog. I'm a Mongolian from Southern Mongolia, always known as Inner Mongolia, as the direct translation of the Chinese word name Mongol. In fact, Mongolians have never called themselves inner or outer. We are just, one Mongolia, one nation since the 13th century. So when we mention Southern Mongolia, a lot of, especially the Westerners, are confused. Where is the Southern Mongolia? Which is just southern part of the, historical Mongolia now, which is one of the Chinese occupied nations. Southern Mongolia and Mongolia, the rest of the Mongolia, were one nation, pretty much up until 1949, when Chinese People's Republic of China officially annexed Southern Mongolia as Inner Mongolia Autonomous Region. And China promised a so-called nationality autonomy. After the 70 years of, ethnic cleansing, genocide, political repression, economic exploitation, and environmental destruction, now we do not have any autonomy, as Mongolians lost all of their political rights, and even their most basic human right is completely taken away. So let me give you a little bit brief history of what exactly happened during the past 74 years. Is that Southern Mongolia was, as I mentioned earlier, officially annexed as the first nationality minority autonomous region, and then became the model, so-called model autonomy, which is again, later on used in East Turkestan and Tibet, as well as two other regions. So officially, China has 5 nationality autonomous regions. One of them is Southern Mongolia. And then, as soon as the so-called autonomous region was established, China started the, process of taking away all political rights of the Mongolians. And for example, in 1950s, China implemented the so-called national rightist movement, anti-national rightist movement, and tens of thousands of Mongolians are accused of, nationalists, and then killed. And then in 1960s, there was another large-scale, genocide took place in Southern Mongolia. The government of China and the Chinese settlers in Southern Mongolia carried out massive killings in Southern Mongolia. The entire Mongolian population is targeted, and their crime is just becoming Mongolian. That's their crime. So the estimated number of victims is Mongolians believe at least 100,000 Mongolians were killed and 500,000 persecuted. At that time, the Mongolian population in Southern Mongolia is about 1.5 million. That means 1/3 of the population is affected by this massive genocide. As soon as completing the physical genocide, China started its, cultural genocide. Starting in 2001, China implemented 2 sets of policies targeting the Mongolian traditional way of life. And these 2 sets of policies are total ban over livestock grazing and ecological migration. So Chinese government blamed that the Mongolians destroyed their land ecosystem with the backward traditional way of life. That's their justification for carrying out and altering Mongolian traditional way of life completely. And Chinese own the central government website state that by end of 2015, all nomadic people within the territory in the territory of the People's Republic of China are all moved to either urban area or agricultural area. What that means is by end of 2015, nomadic civilization is officially wiped out in China. That, of course, is Southern Mongolia, a big part of the this affected area. Probably Tibetan nomads and the Kazakh nomads are also impacted by this policy. So after wiping out the Mongolian traditional way of life, what China was targeting is the only remaining national defense of Mongolian national identity, which is language, Mongolian language. Now, in 2020, Chinese government, central government, issued a new policy in the name of second-generation bilingual education, which is, in fact, is not bilingual at all. It's just a monolingual Chinese language education, and then they just wiped out the Mongolian educational system entirely. Then teaching in Mongolian is crime in Southern Mongolia now. They said, there was regional law called Ethnic Minority Autonomy Law, which was passed in 1980s, but now Chinese government is saying this autonomy law is unconstitutional. That's why, Mongolia, using Mongolian language, speaking Mongolian language in South Mongolia is not allowed. So not only that, they're just also targeting anything that with Mongolian characteristics, including sculptures and, signs, banners in Mongolian are all taken down in South Mongolia. So parents who want to teach their children Mongolian after the school is also banned. There is new law saying that any parents who educate teach Mongolian to their children is completely banned. So that's what's happening in Southern Mongolia now. Before wrapping up, I would like to touch upon another case, very interesting case of Mr. Mongkwair Cholondorj. Mongkwair Cholondorj is a citizen of the independent country of Mongolia. And that he was arrested last year and then sentenced to 10 years in jail. He is an activist, human rights defender. He defended the right of all Mongolians, including Southern Mongolia, and the citizen of the independent country of Mongolia. But he was accused of working with the Indian intelligence against People's Republic of China. And then government of Mongolia punished him for spying against People's Republic of China. So all these are done under the pressure from China. So Chinese ambition, colonial ambition, does not stop in Southern Mongolia. It's stretching a long arm to the independent sovereign country of Mongolia. So this is a dire warning to the rest of the world that if we do not take action immediately to stop China, confront China from doing these kind of things, what waiting us is the same fate of Mr. Mongkwair. That's why I would like to emphasize that China threat is real and existential. It's countries, nations, like especially the countries of Belt and Road Initiative, they are facing the similar issues, similar challenges. Thank you.
We're going to do a round of two of questions and then come to our honored guest. I want to pick up on something that you just talked about there at the end, Engelbert, and that is this question of identity. This is a somewhat nebulous notion, but you and your countrymen in Mongolia have had firsthand hard experience with what it means to have that essentially erased from generations of Mongolians' consciousness, forcibly, I think coercively in many cases. I wanted to ask you about a factor in all of this that, again, I think is at work in the various countries that are being now targeted and enslaved elsewhere around the world. Brad Thayer has written a book about it, as a matter of fact. I think the term he's used is called Han supremacism, which is a rather genteel term for racism, I think it's fair to say. Would you talk a little bit about that fact in the complexion of the pressure and the coerciveness and the totalitarian rule that you've seen accompany the kind of colonialism of the Chinese Communist Party in Southern Mongolia?
As I mentioned earlier, Chinese ambition is not stopping, in these three occupied nations: Southern Mongolia, Tibet, East Turkestan, now Hong Kong, and then even Taiwan, even the independent country of Mongolia. It's on their target, and so yes, as we all know, China is now launching the huge project of Belt and Road Initiative. I think it's like more than 140 nations got already involved in this project, and China promised a lot, and then they said, yeah, it's a common prosperity, and then all these things. And which remind us our history. Like in 70 years ago, China exactly promised the same thing. We will develop you. We will open up, boost your living standard. You will be free. And then even Chinese at the beginning, Mao Zedong himself had, promised to the Mongolians that, okay, descendants of Genghis Khan are now you are now free, and then you can have your separate nation if you want, and in the same time, if you want, you can stay with us. That's what they said, and then they promised a lot. We from our tragic history, we just tell you that they promise a lot of nice things: brotherhood, development, common prosperity. This is very familiar pattern how they did the things in Southern Mongolia. So yes, I mean that's why I would like to really remind all of the nations, like especially the Belt and Road Initiative nations. They are like receiving this so-called help or assistance from China, and then they believing what the China say, taking what China said at face value, saying, okay, this is common prosperity, it's just economic, but in fact it's not. China is exporting authoritarianism, and then look at some example. For example, Tajikistan. China is claiming that half of Tajikistan territory is China's historical territory. Since long time ago, I don't know, since antiquity or whatever, that Ziguilai, that's a very big word. But that's exactly what happened in Southern Mongolia, and then now it's exactly going to happen and happening in the countries around China, and then even in Africa, South America, Central America. Thank you.
Thank you.
I just wanted to underscore this point because one of the leading edges of the attack by the Chinese Communist Party and its fellow travelers, its friends, as they call them, in the United States, of course, is that ours is a racist country, a systemically racist country. I think based on your hard experience in Southern Mongolia and elsewhere, especially in places like Black Africa, you don't understand the magnitude of racism until you feel it at the hands of the Han Chinese. Se Hoon, you spoke about a port in Pakistan. One of our colleagues and a frequent contributor to these webinars, Joseph Humeyer, of the Center for a Secure Free Society, has recently done an analysis of, you mentioned Latin America, that part of the Western Hemisphere now has reportedly some 40 ports the Chinese Communist Party is building, essentially modernizing or otherwise taking over. Notably at both ends of the Panama Canal and in places like Peru and Brazil, which enable the projection of power through the Pacific and Atlantic respectively. Would you talk a little bit more about, as a man with some military experience in our armed forces, the implications of this power projection infrastructure that is now being built?
Well, thank you, Frank, for that. I think there's plenty to touch regarding that particular point. I think I should also mention that 40% of Venezuela's mineral mines are actually owned by Chinese companies, all operated and owned by the Chinese Communist Party. So we can say that the CCP essentially owns 40% of the territories of Venezuela that produces mineral mines. How scary is that? Right? But the other thing is they have also practiced this in Southern Mongolia. As you know, 90% of precious minerals in the world come from Southern Mongolia. And the fact that it is being repeated in other parts of the world, like Venezuela, is a clear indication that they do not do anything unless they tested it out somewhere else. The Mongols have paid for it. I'm sure many Tibetans also paid for it. We're also seeing many of the lands within the Uyghurs, on top of the concentration camp issues, the mineral mines are being extracted over there. Let's also look at the case of Afghanistan, for example. I'm really glad to see our friends from Afghanistan here. Is that after the fall of Kabul, under the work of this administration, we have also seen a few things happening. The Chinese influence within Afghanistan has set in, and the Taliban, as you know, were recognized first by the Chinese Communist Party. What they're doing right now, and again, as I would say, a far descendant from our great Mongol friends, as a Korean, it truly upsets me, is that the Hazaras of Afghanistan are facing a genocide under the Taliban, all aided and helped by what we call the great malign entity, the Chinese Communist Party. One of the main reasons why, and as our friends from the Hazara region will be able to tell you, is that their mineral mines, their natural resources are also being extracted under the name of economic development. And the Taliban are happy to just let them grace forward. Matter of fact, the Taliban has become sort of the lapdogs of the Chinese Communist Party to wipe out anything, any dissent in that area. We're also seeing a country of Afghanistan that's also not been condemned by the Chinese Communist Party, by the, or even by Putin's Russia. They're not letting women enter into schools anymore. All the universities that had any traces of female education has been closed down, and it's being normalized. And we're seeing the tyranny of the CCP, or even this tyranny of all tyrannies, being normalized in other parts of the world. And aside from people becoming a collateral damage, we're also systematically being indoctrinated almost, and I fear for our future generation, into accepting this as the new normal. And that is extremely scary. And even just going back to our Southern Mongolian friends, they, and again, our friends from Tibet, our East Turkestan, and even recently our friends from Hong Kong, they've been warning us time and time again that this will happen around the world. I'm sure every country around the world wants to have a good relations with China and with the Chinese people. That's all dandy and fine. But let's look at what is happening behind the scenes. Let's look at what's happening and the sentiments of the countries around the Chinese Communist Party or the People's Republic of China. As I mentioned to you before, if you ask an average person within South Korea or Japan or Taiwan or the Philippines what they think about the CCP, they will say they are trying to take us over, we are unhappy with them, we're looking for a new alternative. Luckily, we have great countries like India, where we can actually rebuild a lot of our industries over there. We hope that we can expand to other countries as well. But also, let's not forget that not all hope is lost. Let's also not forget that one thing that we do not see from communist China today is innovation, which is present in the free world. And as you have seen, again, in companies coming out of South Korea or Japan, Taiwan, even countries within Southeast Asia, we need to open their industries and their innovation and their tech industries and all of that together and give them an alternative, saying that China's not the only option anymore. And many of them, I'm very happy to say, have realized that and are moving to other nations with other potentials. You know, even just going back to our Southern Mongolian issue, one of the reasons why, as a director of the captive nations, I made a decision to engage with our Southern Mongolian friends is that they have been ignored for far too long. And I cannot use the word brother or as a family under our great Genghis Khan if we don't do anything to help them. And helping them doesn't just mean advocacy. Helping them literally, in my mind, equals to saving and securing the freedom that we have today, and possibly even restoring the freedom that once existed in the lands like Southern Mongolia. And as a person who have benefited from the struggle of the free world against communist aggression, I remember my grandfather telling me that the North Korean regime came down and just absolutely almost annihilated his entire village. This man is the same man who spent time in Manchuria and Vladivostok, but in his home turf, everything was about to be wiped out. But it was because of the free forces that came to their aid that I'm standing here in front of you, and many of us are standing in front of you. But the cold fact is this: that is no longer becoming a reality for our future generation. That probably won't become a reality for many Ukrainians, many Burmese people out there, many of the people who have been truly victimized by the system that shame on us also for normalizing it. I'll end with this: is that people have said, well, what can we do to combat all of this? My answer is simple. We're a nation, and we are a world that is known for making the impossible possible. Meaning, they have told us, well, how can you? Well, one of the ways that we can do it is to maybe stop using all made in China products. People have said, well, that is impossible. Well, I remember in the past people telling us ending slavery was impossible. I remember people telling us that putting people on the moon, it was impossible. But we sure as hell, and again, I'm sorry for the language, but we sure as hell made it happen. And we can sure as hell, stand with the peoples who have done so much to warn us, despite all the things that they were going through. And we can choose to do the right thing. And we may not even benefit it in our lifetime, but sure as hell for the next generation. So I'm going to remember that. Thank you so much.
Finally, Brad Thayer, you have spoken about this and written about it extensively, but I wanted to sort of bring this to a conclusion on an uplifting note that you touched on in your remarks. And that is, in the struggle for freedom against the tyranny of the Chinese Communist Party, as a generation ago, in the struggle for freedom against the tyranny of the Soviet Communist Party, the question of legitimacy is a vital one. And my old boss, Ronald Reagan, famously described that previous totalitarian communist threat to our country, the existential threat to freedom of his day, as the evil empire. And I would just ask you to address with us a little bit, in the context of the enslavement that we're witnessing taking place at the hands of the Chinese Communist Party, how important it is not just for the people of these prospective captive nations, not just for those that are actual captive nations, and indeed the people of China themselves, the very first captive nation of the Chinese Communist Party, to recognize that this is, as you said earlier, not only an illegitimate regime, but I would argue a transnational criminal organization, which has all kinds of implications, legal and economic and practical, that go to the heart of this matter, of its legitimacy and the need to resist it in every manner possible. Would you speak to that briefly?
Well, thank you, Frank. That's an extremely important question to address. And my comments here are three. The first of which is, of course, as Frank noted, and as I referenced in my remarks, that the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, is illegitimate It's illegitimate in every respect. It's illegitimate because it is divorced from any type of democratic consent that would be derived from the Chinese people, and that includes the Han, of course, as well as minority populations. It does not respect minority rights within China, and it's really just a Soviet knockoff. It's an importation of a Western ideology foisted on the Chinese people by Stalin and by Mao Zedong ultimately. And so it is outrageous that the Han and the greatness of Han civilization, philosophy, religion, of course, are ruled by a failed Western ideology, which is completely divorced from the indigenous, the local political tradition. So we look forward at some point in time, perhaps not in the not too distant future, to a post-communist polity in China that would be like Taiwan or Hong Kong before it was crushed by Xi Jinping, that would be incredibly beneficial for the Chinese people, but would also reduce China's aggressiveness, which again is driven by the CCP and the desire to export the ideology, to crush people around the world. The insistence that other nations recognize its sovereignty, whether through these service centers that we have seen crop up, or through the national security law oppressing Hong Kong and Taiwanese citizens. Secondly, in that observation, if we're thinking about the CCP and its rule of China, we can also recognize that the party itself is a mess of contradictions, of corruption, of misrule, of abuse. And so in some respects, because it is a Soviet knockoff, we shouldn't be surprised that the problems that greatly affected the Soviet Union, the tyranny, the oppression of the people, the abuse of the environment, the abuse of everyone who's engaged with it, is found in China today under the CCP. So we must recognize, of course, its fundamental ideological incoherence and the fact that it cannot continue and won't continue if it's cut off from Western trade and Western finance and is forced to encounter and incur the costs of its own policies. Third and lastly, when we're reflecting on it, I was always struck by a great Zambian politician named Guy Scott, who, reflecting on China's influence in Africa, including his own country of Zambia, said, "We've had bad people before. The whites were bad, the Indians were worse, but the Chinese are worst of all in terms of their exploitation of the Zambian people, of their abuse of the people, and the inability to recognize the Zambians as humans rather than, in essence, being a commodity for consumption and to serve at the behest of the Chinese Communist Party." So we see in Guy Scott's comments really the heart of the issue, which is the dehumanization. There's no reason at all that whether it's Muslim peoples, Kazakhs, Kyrgyz, or Uyghurs in East Turkestan, whether it's Mongols, whether it's Manchus, whether it's Tibetans, or other oppressed minorities, or the diaspora abroad, the insistence that the Chinese Communist Party places on crushing dissent in the diaspora population, but reaching into the United States, Canada, every country around the world to crush these individuals. It's not a surprise that this is dehumanizing. And it's time for the world to say enough. This is it. This is an illegitimate political enterprise. Frank calls it a transnational criminal organization. I call it a Soviet knockoff because that's, in essence, to my mind, what it is, a form of Stalinism, which still exists today, and it's time for the world to say enough of this. We're not going to tolerate its abuses anymore, and to move beyond it. Thank you.
Thank you, Brad. Just a couple of concluding comments. I'm so glad you mentioned something that I'd meant to touch on as well. In terms of this enslavement, according to a non-governmental organization in Spain, Sentinel Defenders, there are now over 100 so-called overseas, I think the word you left out, police service centers that have now been established, including at least one in our country, unbelievably. And the sort of service that is rendered by these centers is to coerce individuals, perhaps Chinese nationals, perhaps Chinese expatriates, citizens of the countries in question, their descendants, to come into the service center, in many cases apparently to be exposed to a loved one, a family member, on a video screen being interrogated by a prosecutor in mainland China, which is in some cases used to induce them to return to China, to presumably a very unsavory fate, or to simply behave themselves while they're here. A message that is not lost on the others in the diaspora or their descendants in the states in which these centers are operating. This is an instrument of enslavement, ladies and gentlemen. Make no mistake about it. And it's just the leading edge of what the Chinese have in mind. I wanted to mention, because we do have friends from Afghanistan in the room, I had the privilege of being with my colleague, Lieutenant Colonel Tommy Waller, in the back of the room last night in a marvelous setting just down the street at the Museum of the Bible. The unveiling of a terrific new book, Saving Aziz, which talked about both the moment in which the surrender of Afghanistan by our government, as Se Hoon talked about, took place and what flowed from it, what is flowing from it today in terms of the horrors for the people of Afghanistan, including those who worked with us during the time we were there. It is a very compelling book. There's a movie associated with it as well, and I commend it all to each of you. Finally, I just wanted to say a word of personal welcome. There are many friends and colleagues in the press and otherwise here, but Jan Jekielek is a personal hero of mine. Few people are doing more day in and day out at epic times than he is to really showcase the fight that we are in. His marvelous program, American Thought Leaders, I've had the privilege of being on it myself, but it's a showcase for people who are freedom fighters. And I want to thank you for coming, Jan, and as well as the work you do, and most especially to use it as kind of a vehicle for exhorting all of us to take to heart how precious freedom is, how much it is at risk. Not necessarily from the overt violent kind, though that may be coming, of unrestricted warfare, but the sort that we are witnessing taking place around the world today, concealed as commercial transactions and, well, payday loans to build infrastructure and lift up people. This is not about lifting people up. This is about keeping them down, in fact, keeping them more down than ever before. So with that, I want to say thank you on behalf of myself, Frank Gaffney, with the Center for Security Policy, and here with the Committee on the Present Danger of China, especially to those of you who are joining us. As part of our webinar series, I encourage you to subscribe to it at presentdangerchina.org. It's a fabulous resource, if I do say so myself, and we encourage you to help us share the contents of this particular very important program and others with your friends, your colleagues, your family, and others who need to know. With that, I'm going to turn the program over to my colleague and friend Se Hoon Kim to introduce properly our honored guest for part of the program that follows this, sponsored by our Committee on the Present Danger of China. Over to you, sir.
Well, again, thank you so much. We have now concluded this portion of our the Committee on Present Danger China's weekly web series. Again, as our colleague and friend Mr. Frank Gaffney has said, please subscribe and share widely. And now we have entered into a new technically event. But before we do that, I would like to acknowledge somebody. We would actually not all be here had it not for this one person, which is Mr. Enkbat Tokchok. For about 25 years or so, this man has worked tirelessly, even in the face of complete silence by policymakers, to fight for the rights of Mongols. And if anything, you have portrayed something that the world have missed out for many, many centuries. Now again, some and many might have a different viewpoint of our great Genghis Khan, but to us, he is our great Khan forever. And Mr. Enkbat, you have embodied his spirit. You have embodied also the spirit of the great Mongol people. And again, thank you also for fighting for us. And also with our Hazara friends in the back, I'll tell you something. Had it not been for a very brief moment of encountering that one Facebook post of Mr. Enkbat yelling for the rights of Hazaras 10 years ago, we would not have known who the Hazaras were. And so this man is a hero, and I would like to properly thank him on behalf of everybody, and if we can give a round of applause for Mr. Enkbat. And now we're very honored and privileged to have a very, very distinguished guest coming to join us all the way from Mongolia. He has been traveling around the world fighting for various issues, one of them being the ending to the death penalty, and also just spreading this awareness of the freedom of the Mongol people all over, whether they be from Mongolia all the way out into the Middle East, Central Asia, and so on and so forth. Just a bit about our great guest, Honorable Tsakhiagiin Elbegdorj. He has in the past served as two-time Prime Minister and two-time President at the Mongolian People's Republic, but today he has come on the capacity, and solely on the capacity, of the President of the World Mongol Federation, which works for the rights and the preservation of the culture of all Mongols around the world. And I am extremely glad, and extremely honored and glad to host him here today. And on behalf of all of us, Mr. President, welcome.
Yeah, thank you very much. You know, when we talk about Mongols, of course, we talk a lot about our history, and I think many people wonder that how in 13th centuries those Mongols built largest land empire on the earth. I think there are many secrets, maybe there are many issues to study, but one was very important. I think Mongols, our Han, Genghis Khan, Kublai Khan, all those people were greatly respected. People's belief, fundamentally people's belief in their religious belief. Also people's belief to be different from others. That was really greatly respected. Genghis Khan himself told that if you are in the hearts of minds of people, body will go nowhere. Body will follow. In order to get that hearts and minds of people, of course you have to respect that people's right to have their own beliefs and own rights and rights of expression. Other than Mongolians succeeded during that time, of course, securing the Silk Road and free exchange of goods. And during Genghis Khan, during Mongolian Empire, all we know that West and East actually truly had that connection through the Silk Road. And also Genghis Khan ruled during that time under written law called Great Governance. That law actually was written in the books, in the paper, 1206, 9 years earlier than Magna Carta. We all know that. He not brought his will or one person's or other ruling person's will, but he brought that principles which was written in his law. That was also attractive to others. And if you want to learn more about Mongols, of course there are books called Secret History of Mongols. That book was written during Genghis Khan's lifetime. I regard that's the biography of Genghis Khan. If you go to Amazon, if you get that book, you can read that. Also, there are some writers are writing, including American writer, Genghis Khan, the Modern World Order. How he brought 800 years ago that modern world order. I see that Chinese Mongols actually made Chinese to build that Great Wall, which stretches 7,000 kilometers. I assume that's the border between sedentary and nomadic civilizations. Why we established the World Mongols Federation, that Inkpat mentioned that in 2000, yeah? China actually announced officially to ban learning Mongolian language, scripture in schools. That was really outrageous. And that actually waked up Mongols in Mongolia. There were widespread protests against that policy in Inner Mongolia. And you know, in Mongolia we have 3.5 million Mongols live, and 18th largest land mass we have. But in China we have more Mongols than in Mongolia. In China there are 5 million Mongols live actually. And in Russia there are 1 million Mongols live. All worldwide we have 10 million Mongols. We really see that the 10 million Mongols mean they are 10 million lives, 10 million assets for keeping the Mongol identity, Mongol language, Mongol culture, Mongol tradition, and proud of our history. And I was born and raised in a herdsman family, and my parents have 8 children. I am the youngest of 8. All of them are boys. And imagine that my parents was born in 1920s. Mongolia became second communist country after Russia. That socialist countries became socialist in Eastern Europe after World War II, after 1945. But Mongols suffered under communism since 1920s. And I studied in the Soviet Union for 5 years. I studied in Ukraine, in a most western city called Lvov. Today, Ukrainians are fighting for their right to exist. And I studied in Soviet Union, also I studied in Harvard. And I usually say that, you know, I have that unique experience in studying in those 2 superpowers, but one is no longer superpower, Soviet Union. I think, of course, the reason why collapsed Soviet Union, it's because of that was a real evil empire. When I studied in Soviet Union, President Reagan visited Moscow, and he pronounced that his speech and his term, evil empire. Soviets actually talked about in their language, in Russian. But we learned, most of our people there actually, even though we were born in communist system, even we educated, even we are studying that Marxism, Leninism there, we thought maybe it's evil empire. It's time to change it. And I graduated in 1988, and I came back to my country. And Gorbachev actually during that time announced his policy, perestroika, glasnost, and many bad things, many worse things, many crimes which committed Lenin and Stalin actually became known during my student time. I thought many of them also happened in Mongolia. Mongolians not really accepted peacefully communism in Mongolia, also in China. During Stalin's purge, 1 out of 6 adult men were killed. 1 out of 6. And we had 700 Buddhist temples, for example, in Mongolia. All of them destroyed to the ash. Buddhist temple means not only one building. That's the complex. There were 700 of them. And they destroyed it to the ash. And they killed 27,000 Buddhist innocent lamas. And they targeted all the color of the Mongolian society. And they killed everyone had a relation, blood relation with Genghis Khan golden lineage. They killed everyone. No one left in Mongolia. That was so brutal regime. But of course in Inner Mongolia they faced a lot of crimes of the Chinese Communist Party. And when I came back in 1988, in the late of 1980, we established non-ground movement. I was one of the founders of that movement. And I was the first person to moderate first demonstration against communist regime in Mongolia. During that time, Soviet Union was Soviet Union was intact. In China, that Tiananmen massacre just happened. Between them, those young people raising the flag of freedom and freeing the Mongolia from communists, that was really unusual. But we actually made the transition in total peaceful means. We did not shatter a single window. We did not shed single drop of blood. That actually, why it happened, only we had in our hands mic and paper. We just asked them, let's sit down. Let's sit down, talk about this issue. Let's change our constitution. Let's give people freedom to speak. Let's allow that religious freedom. Let's privatize those herds to the herdsmen. Actually, in 1950s, 60s, they confiscated and they put like Soviet of the colonial system. My father was working there. My father is herdsman. In order to feed their children, he has to ask permission from that sovkhoz chairman. Just slaughter one sheep to feed their children. He begged permission. I knew that through my life. And we changed our country, and now only surviving democracy between Russia and China is Mongolia. In July 1990, we had our first elections. And I was in my 26 years old, I was elected to the parliament. We gave that party which ruled Mongolia for 70 years, we just gave them room. In Mongolia, we like horse races. If you have horse race, there is no only one horse. There should be other horses participate. Let's race together. Most probably you will win. But have that multi-party system. Let's give to the people choice whom they want to see their president, their member of parliament, their government. Let's give that right to the Mongols. Democracy was not only way to build that society, democratic society, but democracy was main means rid of the Soviet communism in Mongolia. And we fought it in 1990, communists won again, but we changed our constitution, and they had a great fear. In 1990, that was great time, you know, President Reagan, President Bush, and Secretary of State Jim Baker in May 1990 visited Mongolia, and he said, you have two neighbors, America can be your third neighbor, and we like that concept. That became our main foreign policy concept now. We call America, European Union, today third neighbors. And I became one of the drafters of the Mongolian Democratic New Constitution. And we adopted that within 2 years. In 1992, we had our elections, again communists win. Only in 1996, my coalition, my party won first time. But we lost again to the communists. I was first president to be elected from the Democratic camp in Mongolia. I competed with the president who was also from the old Communist Party. Just before having the 1 week election result, Putin came to in Mongolia. And he publicly supported that current president. Oh, he's a good guy. We are friends. Hey, Mongols, you have to support this guy. And he really disregarded. Our people asked to meet Putin, and we have our candidate for president. You want to meet? He refused to meet, and he flew back. But he made bad mistake, and I became president after 7 days of Mongolia. Since then, I had more than 30 meetings with Putin, equal same number of meetings with the Se Hoon Kim. One thing I would like to say that, you know, really of course, there was support, and now that Mongolian democracy, surviving democracy, that fragile, now became really fragile, that democracy. And that's underappreciated now. I usually say that you guys have a hot war in Ukraine against Putin regime. But in Mongolia since 1990, we are having still that Cold War against authoritarian governments in China and in Russia. Russia put 40%, 60%, 80%, 100% of tariff taxes, all Mongolian goods, since 1990. That's the economic sanction. If something is not pleased the Chinese side, nothing will go. You guys today talk about the Belt and Road Initiative. There is no single kilometer Belt Road was built by Belt Road Initiative in Mongolia, because Mongolians never negotiate their freedom with Chinese. During my presidency, you know that organization called Shanghai Cooperation Organization? They pressed Mongolia became their member. Since the establishment, Mongolia became the observer country. I told them, Mongolia gonna be observer, never gonna become member, Shanghai Cooperation Organization. We never gonna accept those ideas, you know, putting those ideologies. And we never gonna accept maybe those military coming to Mongolia to suppress Mongolian people's freedom. Now we have in Southern Mongolia our people. And one thing I would like to say that how you guys really surviving. I usually say that, you know, one time actually Mongols were controlling all China, all Russia, even today's Ukraine, even today's Middle East. You all know that Persia, today's Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan, everything was under Mongolian control. We controlled them at least 100 years, some of them 300 years. They paid us taxes. It was good. During that time, that Mongolian New World Order called Pax Mongolica, means Peace Mongolia. During that time, world experienced 100 years of peace. Because we respected people's belief, because we respected people's right. Now it's no longer. And I really like all those people are fighting freedom outside of China or also inside of China. I think human rights, freedom is not a nationalistic issue. This is universal. If there is someone trying to suppress freedom in Hong Kong or in Taiwan or in China, we have to voice. Something happened in Inner Mongolia. Just that week, I came out and I issued video statement against Chinese Communist Party policy against the Mongolian people in China. I wrote letter to Xi Jinping. Why you are doing that? If I see in your constitution, in a fourth clause, in a fourth chapter, saying that all the ethnic minorities in China entitled to exercise their culture and entitled to learn their languages and everything, why you are working against your constitution? You are lying. And you stop it. Why you are going to make Inner Mongolia, maybe second Xinjiang or something like that? I think also I say that we are lucky to have Mongols, of course, living in China. That's a great asset for us, and we like our culture, and we are just same people who live, Mongols, those who live in China, those who live in Mongolia, just same people. We should have that right to be proud of our history, to be proud of our culture and our language, our scripture. And because of that, worldwide Mongols actually united, and they established a network, they established World Mongol Federation, and they invited me to be their president, and I accepted it. One Inner Mongolian came, who escaped to Mongolia, and he told me that was really heartwarming. I thought it's worth to fight. He told me that. When Chinese police came to my house, suppress and question why my children is learning Mongolian, we say, hey, President Elbegdorj is watching us. President Elbegdorj is protecting us. Wow. That's just one beauty to be human being. If your people same blood, if your people same genes, if same Mongols who are suppressed in other countries and talking about like that, means that it's really worth to fight it. Yeah. Because of that, this communist ideology now, it's actually changing its face, but it's not changing its core or its core evil character. Inside, same thing. And because of that, we are not negotiating. When I met Putin and Xi Jinping, I always told them, I'm elected from Mongolian people. I raised in a herdsman family. The Mongol people's interest and their will is most important thing for me. And I'm representing it. And they know that whom they are meeting. If you have that value, I think you become equal. I defend my value. I defend my people's value. And I say to them, even when I visited in China, we have a different philosophy of development. In China, in Russia, maybe they think that their leader is powerful. Their country gonna be, in their country gonna be stability or prosperity. But in Mongolia, we choose different path, totally different path. If our people are powerful, our country gonna be powerful. Yeah. in order to confront those big neighbors, I think our people, all our people should have a right to say, all our people should have a right to create. I think democracy means not to please everyone, but to keep everyone's right to be different. That's the main thing. We wrote that in our constitution, and we are following that. Now in Mongolia, they are pushing from both sides to change our constitution, to bring down people's expression, freedom in social media, and we are fighting. One thing is in Mongolia that democracy is grassrooted, and they know that price, how much we paid for that price, not only since 1990, before that. All those men were killed, all those things were eliminated, all those things. I think they are price. And on that, actually, today's Mongolian freedom is enduring. Even though some people think that Mongolia is a small country, but I consider my country is not small. In terms of the freedom, there is fragile light. But that light can be seen from darkness, from very far. When I was president and North Koreans asked to visit, and I said, okay. But they asked me, what do you want to do in North Korea? What would you like to see? And I said, oh, three things. Through my foreign minister, I told. I want to visit that prison camps, that labor camps. I heard there are hundreds of North Koreans conscious, all those prisoners you have. Is it true or not? I would like to see by my own eye. And second, I said, I want to visit that nuclear facility. That strict nuclear closed facility I want to visit. Third, I just want to visit one just ordinary North Korean family and share tea with that family. And my foreign minister came back and said, hey, Mr. President, they said all those three things impossible. Do you have other things to request? And when we put that condition, we knew that, we sensed that they may say that that's impossible. But after that, we put also other things. And one of them was the reading lecture at the Kim Il-sung University. Okay, we accept that. You go read your lecture at the Kim Il-sung University. But don't mention three things. First, human rights. Second, democracy. Third, free market economy. Don't mention. And I said, okay, I'm not going to mention that. And I read my lecture, and title of my lecture was, No Dictatorship Lasts Forever. And I told them there are other ways, not pursuing the nuclear weapons, not persecuting their people, you know. North Korean people are suffering a lot for 3 generations. Only they are like living for the 3 families of him. Maybe other people, there are like, as people say that, like a commodity. They see that. For the sake of those 3 families, they are living. That's really outrageous. And also I know that there are many North Koreans, before Beijing Olympic came, escaped from North Korea through Mongolia. We received them, we fed them, and we gave to the South Korean side. That was the route. But during Beijing Olympic game, they closed. Since then, they cannot reach. Actually, with my friends, I had that idea to receive them and to treat them and to give them to the South Korea. You know, we can confront even evil, even anything. I usually identify my country like a freedom-loving horse, freedom-loving pony, between dragon and between bear. When you are the freedom-loving pony, horse, or wolf, you usually see the soft spots of those big ones. I think those soft spots are what they are hiding. They are hiding their crimes against their own people. We have to expose it. Main weapon to confront CCP or, those autocratic governments, you have to expose it. We have a means to expose it. Everyone has a cell phone. You have to tap and you have to, shift it, give it to other friends to show it, what they are hiding. And they think that they are powerful, but they are not very powerful. They are afraid of single person's critic, just fair critic. They are afraid of their people's voice. They are not so powerful. In Iran, they are afraid of just that hijab. Single woman's ladies hijab. What can make? What kind of trouble can cause to Ayatollahs? Since first day war against Ukraine, I stood for Ukrainians. I issued many statements. I demanded Putin to stop their war against Ukraine. Ukrainians are not only fighting for Ukrainian cause, to their right to exist. They are fighting for world security, for everyone's right to be free. I think this war is not only between Ukraine and Russia. This front line actually runs very wide. I think most of the autocratic leaders, those autocrats watching very carefully this war, outcome of this war. If Putin wins, autocrats will be encouraged. If Ukraine prevails, I think autocrats will be discouraged. Now even Xi Jinping thinking that to send his force to Taiwan and take forcefully Taiwan or not. But Xi Jinping hesitating. He might face same fate of Putin today. If he thinks that in 2014 Crimea, he may go there. But 2022, Ukraine situation is very different. And I'm really happy that now Western nations gave those tanks, but they are waiting. But I usually say that wounded Ukraine has no time to wait. If you are facing rape, if you are facing killings, if you are facing looting, if you are facing those Russian missiles, Ukraine has no time to wait. Putin is not waiting. He's launching his missiles to the infrastructures of Ukraine, killing them, and trying to starve them, trying to freeze them. I think Putin started that war because free Ukraine may succeed. Free Ukraine may look like for Russians attractive. Because of that, he just started that war. And he made a fatal mistake. And we need to Ukraine until they win, until we rebuild Ukraine, and we have to show how can we unite it. Not only win the war, we have to show how that free Ukraine try again. I really believe that homes will rebuild again. Those wounded hills will be, life will return again. And we have to support. I think if Ukraine wins, all those autocrats, all those people are watching, they will be discouraged. That's really true. And all our friends in other countries, freedom-loving friends, will be encouraged. And let's stand. Let's not negotiate freedom with those autocrats. Let's support each other. Let's unite, against those evil minds who are in power. Now I see that there is one of the most concerning trend in China, that CCP marriage with the surveillance, with the technology. And they have that surveillance system, watching everyone's step, everyone's mood. If they are listening to them, if they are respectful to that, they will award it. If they are not really respectful, then they are punished. That's really bad marriage. CCP may become with the AI, between marriage that became the really big surveillance, really big thing, and they just changed that face. I think they have source to invest in that, and because of that, I think your voice, what you are talking about, is very important, very important. Even though we have here a small audience, I think that actually giving the big thing to the rest of the world. And we have to fight for that. We have to fight for that, for everyone's right to be free. Thank you very much. Okay, yeah, thank you.